Okay, I trust everyone can hear me. We're going to be starting in a couple of minutes. And so if you don't mind hanging on, I think Temba is going to drop an activity for you in the chat so you can have something to do for the next minute or two before we get started. And we'll play some music for you. So if you're just joining us now, we're going to be starting in about a minute or two. Take a look at the YouTube chat window. Temba's going to drop a link in there for you. We've got a little activity for you to do while you're waiting for things to get started. I hate to interrupt this guitar solo, but it is 2 o'clock. Welcome everybody today to CloudEDU's first webinar for 2020. We're jamming how to use Jamboard for online and hybrid learning. I'm Kevin Sherman, Director of Professional Development for CloudEDU, and I'm joined today in the background, Temba Skosana, who's our EdTech evangelist. He's going to be monitoring the chat today, and he's going to join us at the end to share any questions and answers that you guys may have. Today, I just want to give you a brief introduction about CloudEDU. We're South Africa's preeminent Google for Education partner. We do technical services supporting schools in Google for Education, professional development like today's webinar, as well as change management in educational technology for schools. And we are the largest distributor and reseller of Chromebooks in South Africa. So that's a quick 2 seconds on CloudEDU, your hosts. I also wanted to invite you guys, some of you may be interested in learning more about Google certifications, and we're involved in a Google webinar, Teach from Anywhere series, which is going to be having its last webinar tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Temba's going to drop the link for that if you want to register into the chat right now. And if you want to join us tomorrow, that would be fantastic. We're going to have Google Certified Educator Level 1, Google Certified Educators with Level 2 certificates. We're going to have a couple Google Certified Trainers who are educators. We're going to have a couple of Google Certified Innovators, and we're going to be talking about Google's certification programs. So if you want to learn more about those programs for teacher development, please join us tomorrow. We'll have teachers from Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. And for those of you who've been playing around with this, what do you know about Jamboard's word scramble? I want to thank Mrs. You can see her Twitter handle, Mrs. Park. Her Twitter handle is Mrs. Park Shine. That's where I got this from. And so I thought while you guys were waiting, I thought we'd just give you a quick activity. I hope that you guys have been dropping some of the answers into the chat, but just in case you may have missed some, here they are. I hope I got everything spelled or misspelled correctly, scrambled up for you. But as you can see, there may be a lot of things you already knew about Jamboard, but we're going to cover all of these today as well. So today we're going to talk about what Jamboard is, going to share some ideas for using Jamboard. I have a lot of examples to share with you. We'll talk about some Jamboard basics. How do we use Jamboard? How does it work? And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what are some of the extras you get with the Jamboard app on a touchscreen device. And I think Deidre has probably taken the picture of me away already, which is all right, but you can get a Jamboard on your phone or on a tablet. And so I'll talk about those differences, and also the Android app on a Chromebook. And then we'll finish off today with a Q&A, question and answer slot. If you have any questions, we'll take those. We'll probably be right about the 30-minute mark at that point. And Temba, if you want to ask a question, you can drop that into the chat, and Temba's going to keep track of those. So what is Jamboard? Hopefully by now you've figured out that it is a digital whiteboard powered by Google Workspace. It is collaborative, which means that you can have more than one person working in a Jamboard. The Jamboard that I shared with you, however, I shared with you as view only because I didn't want you to play around with it. So it can be collaborative or it can be a static presentation. You can write, you can draw, as you can see, you could type text, you can insert images and sticky notes, and you'll see those sticky notes coming up later on. You can drag and resize both your text and your images, and there's a cool feature in the Android version and the iOS version to sketch a box, a star, a cat, or a dragon. And you can share your jams, as I mentioned, with collaborators. You can share with up to 50 people at a time working together in a Jamboard, which is probably more than your largest class would have. Well, when can you use Jamboard? Well, you can use Jamboard when you're using a Google Meet, so you can teach synchronously using Jamboard, or you can teach asynchronously. In other words, you can assign a Jamboard with Google Classroom and have students work on the Jamboard whenever it's convenient for them. So that's a quick what is Jamboard overview. Let's go through some examples. So one of my favorite examples is to engage learners with a question or to get their opinion about something. Now you can do this in Google Classroom using the Ask a Question feature of Classroom, but to make it a little more visual and perhaps interactive, you can always have learners place a sticky note with their name above several options, and you would define those options in the sticky note that you provide for them. You can also do a class poll that's a little more visually engaging. What food do you like best for dinner? And you can write your name on a small sticky note, or learners can write their name on a sticky note and just drag that sticky note across their favorite selection. I suspect that 90% would not land on a salad. You can have learners think about their personal learning goals for the year, where they write their name in the Jamboard, and then for each set of months, it would be a different frame. And I'll unpack what we mean by frames a little bit later. But here's an example of a couple of months that students can put some learning goals down. You're going to notice today that a lot of my examples are geared for primary teachers. And one of the reasons for that is I work a lot with primary schools with a module we do called G Suite, or Google Workspace now, for the littlest learners. And I'd love the opportunity to do that module for your staff. So many of these examples are ones that I created recently as I was playing around with Jamboard. But high school teachers, don't panic. You will see some examples that will work for you as well. So this is obviously a younger learner who's setting their personal learning goals. We also can have, and here's a high school example, we can put some images into that Jamboard. And on the next two frames, you'll see the directions ask you to label as many of the major bones that we have studied as you can. So learners can drop those labels in either using text or using sticky notes. Another science example, which really nicely demonstrates the ability to draw on an image. So I got this water cycle diagram as clip art, and then I put it into the background of my Jamboard. That way nobody could accidentally delete the image. And then I highlighted a couple of features of that water cycle diagram. So I colored in the sun, and I highlighted evaporation and transpiration, and then focused on the energy from the sun as being a factor in those two processes. And then with infiltration, you'll notice I've written the word gravity. Now I did this on my Chromebook using the touch screen part of the app, and I just wrote those words with my fingers. So it doesn't always have to be pretty. If you're doing hybrid teaching and you want to be able to just mark something up really quickly from a Google Meet, perhaps, Jamboard is an excellent tool for doing that. You can also prepare a lesson in advance and record it as a video. and put that lesson into Google Classroom. So in this example, I would have used something like Screencastify to create a flipped video, right? As I'm describing the process myself and writing on the Jamboard, I'd be recording my screen with Screencastify, and then I'd be able to record my voice along with that, and then drop that video into Google Drive and assign it to my learners in Classroom. This is an example of a brainstorming activity using Jamboard. And I haven't mentioned this, but because you guys came today, you're going to be getting a link at the end of the webinar with a Google Drive folder. It's going to take you to a Google Drive folder that has every template that I show you today and a few that I won't have time to show you. And you're going to be getting all of those for free as part of your attendance today. So that's your reward for coming to some afternoon professional development on a Tuesday. So this is a nice example where the instructions are very clear at the top. Copy a sticky note, then write your thoughts. Vote for your favorite ideas with that little blue diamond. That's the shape tool. And then there's another shape tool where you can draw an arrow so you can identify interesting ideas. And you'll see that section on the right of the screen. You could actually, let me just get my pointer here, you could actually have students drag the sticky notes that they really liked into this section of the brainstorming activity. So that's a complete activity ready to go in Jamboard. This is a nice math example, but it also demonstrates a couple of the features of Jamboard. So here I've used a Google slide deck to actually make the background because I don't want, especially little learners, I don't want little learners clicking and pressing buttons and accidentally deleting my instructions. So I've actually created this in a Google slide. I downloaded it as a PNG, and then I uploaded it back into Jamboard. And in this case, there are 3 frames. So in Google Slides, we talk about the use of slides, right? We have slide number 1, slide number 2, slide number 3. In Jamboard, Google's technical term for those images, those whiteboards, are frames. And so in this case, we've got 3 frames for the Ndebele hut, and I've given students this as a background. So they can't delete the image, they can't change it. All they can do is insert the shapes to decorate their own Ndebele hut. And then the last part of this activity is to do some counting and graphing. And so the 3rd frame looks like that. And students would then count the shapes, and then they would record using those shapes, record how many of each shape they use. So they're doing some graphing, they're doing some counting. It's a really nice activity that engages them in the Jamboard, as well as some mathematics skills. A little more sophisticated use of mathematics. And no, my math teachers who might be watching, I'm not going to solve this problem because I'm a former English and history teacher, and I wouldn't want to embarrass myself because my high school geometry is long forgotten. But you get the idea. So again, I put this image, I created it in Google Slide, and even the instructions are in the slide. I downloaded that as a PNG file, and then I uploaded that back into Jamboard. So it's a little bit of a workflow to keep it child-proof, but that's the way you keep students from deleting your instructions, one of the ways. This is a nice example just to demonstrate how the frames work and that you can quickly duplicate multiple frames. So if you want to give this to your whole class, you can duplicate the frames and tell students in a group or in single students, which frame number they would be working on. Now, I wouldn't try that with little learners because obviously that's going to be difficult instruction to communicate. It would be easier if you're going to do this with little learners to duplicate the slide, put their name on it for them, and then tell them to find their name. Or ideally, you would assign this as make a copy for each student in Google Classroom, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Just another quick math example. I like to make sure the directions are consistent. You may have noticed that most of my directions, I've been using a green sticky note to illustrate where those directions are. And I think that's one of the tips, especially when you're working with younger learners, but even high school students who I used to teach could use a little continuity. So being able to visually signal to students where are the instructions and to be consistent about the coloring. If you give students instructions using a sticky note, that's going to make things a little clearer and less ambiguous for them. There is, for you math teachers, a graph paper background. There are actually 2 different graph paper backgrounds already available in Jamboard built in. So if you're going to do some live teaching and you want to be able to draw a graph or write a formula or use something that's going to be supported by having that graph paper background, that's already available to you. I think I solved this equation a few weeks ago. I hope I did it right, math teachers. This is in your Jamplate folder as well, and I've given you the protractor. And that triangle that you can see there was drawn using the Jamboard tools, which is right over here. You've got a set of tools, and when you click on those tools, you'll see what shapes appear. And I drew that triangle using the triangle tool that's available in that menu bar on the left. And then the protractors and invisible PNG files. So I can draw that triangle and I can use the protractor to find an angle. So that's something as a teacher you could do as a demonstration, or you could give this to your students. For you teachers of primary school, we've got coins for you. So a few years ago, I actually made all of these PNG files, and I've been using them over the years. Some of them you could find on the internet, but some of them I actually had to take my own picture using a camera. And so I've got a Jamboard template ready for you with all the coins that you would need so you can create an activity like this one. In this case, the background has been given to you. Use at least one of each coin to make, and I've written here 95 cents, but that background doesn't have anything where the cents would appear. So you can fill in different amounts to give students practice. And this is just an idea of how you can use the Jamboard to have students do some counting and work with money and do some addition as well. This number place card is a really good activity. I put this one in. There's actually, I think, 7 or 8 frames that go with the template in your Jamplates folder. And the activities come to us from the Kentucky Department of Education. They created a bunch of learning resources for hybrid teaching last year. And I borrowed their activities, copied those for you, and dropped those in your folder. I also did a little redesign on them to make them a little more consistent. But you can see here that students would be able to grab those numbers on the right and put them in the correct order. So in the first case, we'd have the 0, 1, 2, and then we'd pull a 3 and a 4 in. And if there weren't enough of those images available for students, one of the things I would do with little ones is I would show them how they can duplicate an image. It's very easy to do. I'll show you guys how to do that later. I've got another clock example, math. Drawing the hands to show 4:35 on the clock below. I drew this one using the Android app on my Chromebook. So you can see it's not necessarily the prettiest arrow because I was actually using my finger rather than a stylus, but you get the idea that you can give this to students. And I've actually got a template for you that has several different styles of clock. This one's a little more sophisticated. So here the instructions are: fill in the blanks where you see the question marks. How many hours and minutes between the time on the left clock and the time on the right clock? And that's available for you again as one of your jam plates. So I've given you guys 4 different frames as blank backgrounds that you could then use in Jamboard to update and create an assignment from. Let's switch over to English. Those of us who have taught high school English know that idioms are a difficult concept for students. I know this is going to be a little small for you to read, so I'll just read number 1 to you. Dad said he was up to his elbows in baking. What does it mean to be up to your elbows in something? So the instructions say, click on the numbered pink sticky and answer the question in the blue note next to it. So I'm going to be answering using that sticky on the left to define elbows. Define what does it mean to be up to your elbows in something. And then we want a general definition of an idiom for number 3. And then we ask students to come up with an idea of an idiom on their own in number 4. Again, if you were to crowdsource this, you'd get lots of ideas from your entire class. So rather than giving this to one student, I would probably create this as a single, make a copy for each student in Google Classroom. Another pre-writing activity for younger students would be to create a comic book and to get them to start thinking about their comic book and do some pre-writing. What's the story of that comic? Well, we need to identify who our characters are, who are our heroes and villains. We need to decide what the setting is going to be. We need a problem. Every comic has a problem and has to be solved by the hero, usually. And so we want to give the students some support, some scaffolding to help them begin to think about and plan for their writing. Another example of a pre-writing activity would be students who have to write directions, right? That expository writing we have students do. In this case, we're asking them to create steps to explain something like creating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So they're going to click on those steps and they're going to write, they're going to draft some ideas for the steps for building a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, writing those directions. Another English example, grammar, you could do this multiple times with multiple sentences, and I have given you this as a template, and you'll need to pay attention to that template because the images, none of this is in the background. All of this is, I believe, all something that you could delete or the students can delete, because I wanted you to be able to change that sentence, and students have to be able to duplicate these shapes. So we've got a shape here, we've got inside a text block, and so all they need to do is duplicate the shape, and we've given them some clues about how to do that here in the instructions on the bottom, and then they just move the shape, which are invisible, over the correct words. So we move the noun over couple, over ran, bills, bank, cash, and machine. So they're going to be duplicating noun several times for this particular activity. Thinking maps. Okay, we're changing gears. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with thinking maps. I know there's an organization in South Africa called Thinking Skills South Africa that has done workshops on thinking maps. Thinking maps come from an organization in the States that originally developed them as a way to help students to make their thinking more visible. So we've got a few examples here, and I've given you a Jamboard with all of these templates already available. So these have been created for you. I'm just going to talk about a couple of examples. This is my favorite, the double bubble, which is really just a way to do comparison and contrasting. So we might have mammals on the left and reptiles on the right, and we talk about how are they the same? Well, they're the same because they're animals, and we might say we have reptiles and mammals in South Africa, and we can say they walk on the land and they also swim, but they don't. I'm trying to think if I'm correct saying they don't fly. I think I've got, oh, bats. Bats are a mammal that fly. Okay, so I got that wrong. So one of the things we could do in the contrasting would be what makes them different. So reptiles are cold-blooded, mammals are warm-blooded, mammals have hair, reptiles don't. So that's, you get the idea of how you use a compare and contrast. So I've given you guys this template, and each of those text boxes has already been created for you, which makes life a little bit simpler. A Venn diagram is essentially a similar way to do a compare and contrast example. So it's another tool for making that thinking visible. So again, we can identify the similarities in the center and the differences on the outside. And this is a nice visual that shows you how you can make that Venn diagram a little more engaging for students. One of the cool things about a Jamboard is the ability to insert images. And you can get those images directly from Google Search, or you can get those from your Drive, or you can, if you have an Android application or iOS, you can also take a photograph with your camera and insert that directly into a Jamboard. And I'll demonstrate how to do that in a little bit. Just want to check my time. Another kind of way to make thinking visible is to use a thinking routine. Now, I'm just going to show you one example of a thinking routine, but if you're curious about thinking routines, you can Google Harvard Project Zero. And Project Zero at Harvard are the people responsible for thinking routines. One of my favorite thinking routines is a routine where you ask people about, I used to think, and then you ask them, but now I think. So before a session I did last week, G Suite for the Littlest Learners, I asked teachers, what did you used to think before the session? And they said technology was limited for young students. They thought it would be difficult to teach little children to use technology. One person wrote that it would be time consuming. And then I asked them, but since you did this workshop today, what do you think now? And we have things like, I'm able to incorporate technology into the lessons. There are a number of opportunities available to scaffold to help younger learners actively participate. And somebody wrote, I can turn any lesson into a digital lesson. And I love these responses because it shows the teachers got a lot out of that session. But it also demonstrates and tells me about their thinking. So those are some of the ideas for using Jamboard. I've got about 5, 6 more minutes. We're going to talk about some of the basics for how does it work, and then we'll take some of your questions and answers. So there are basically 8 tools in the Jamboard, which make it pretty easy to use, right? It's not overwhelming. You don't have a lot of menus. There's not a lot going on. And there may be some complaints about that. There are things you'll be used to doing in Google Slides. If you switch over to a Jamboard, you might be frustrated. Like you want to select multiple images and copy and paste them. You can't do that in a Jamboard. So Jamboard is intentionally simple because it was originally designed for a piece of hardware called a Jamboard, which is a very a bit pricey for schools, but a very beautiful piece of hardware that Google created. But then they created the app and made it free for all of us, so we could still take advantage of the tools. So we've got a pen tool, and there are 4 different kinds of pens. There's a small pen, there's a fat pen, there's a highlighter tool, and you can play around with these. You've got an eraser, which allows you just to erase over an individual object, or you can click clear the frame, and that will delete everything on the frame. So you want to watch and be a little bit careful when that happens. You can select, there's a select tool to click and drag objects around, but you can't select multiple objects, as I mentioned. There's the sticky note tool right there, and it's really easy to use. You click on that, and the sticky note drops right into the frame. And you can add an image. I'll come back to the adding image in a moment. I mentioned that you can add shapes, and there are 8 kinds of shapes you can add. Text box, and there are some predefined text sizes available when you do use that text box. And just like in this Google slide, there's a laser pointer in Jamboard. So if you're trying to make something more visible and call attention to it, you can do the same thing in Jamboard. Now, I mentioned there are different backgrounds. You can set the basic background as white. Then you can set this any number of these other kinds of Jamboards. I use this one often because I like to distinguish things like instructions. I think it's a nice subtle guide, especially for little learners. It helps define what the frame is, as opposed to just having the whole screen be white. I mentioned the graph paper options. There's a gray one, there's your standard one, and then there are these 2 dark background colors, which I don't use very often. I think they're a little bit too dark. But I do use this all the time. And remember I mentioned that you can customize your background so students can't accidentally delete the image that you want to put on the Jamboard. That's where you would select that add image, and you would upload your own PNG file. So you could make a PNG, you can make an image in Google Slides, and you use that 16:9 ratio. That's the one you want to use for making a background image for Jamboard, 16:9. And you download your slide as a PNG, and then you upload it here to be the background in your Jamboard. Or you can just do a really quick Google image search. So from that insert image, so you set background, insert image, and then you can select Google Images and find an image that you want to use just from directly off of Google search. Now, I mentioned this concept of frames. You can have multiple frames. As soon as you start clicking the right arrow, when you're in a Jamboard, you'll see this menu at the top with your frames. When you click the right arrow, it automatically gives you a blank frame. So if you're creating a template for yourself or for students, you want to pay attention to, did I accidentally add a bunch of blank frames? That may confuse students. It's something that I do often when I'm preparing for things like today. But the frame navigator will allow you to see all of your frames and helps you to navigate. So this is an image of the frame navigator. You can see a little mini screenshot of each frame, and you can add a frame if you wanted to insert one between the 2 frames. You could do that with that button, and you can navigate across. If there were 3, 4, 5, you would keep going across here. You'll see all your frames from the frame navigator. And you can even see who is on a frame. So if you have a multiple people working on a frame at once and you're curious who's working on that frame right now, you have a way to do that. You can see their images. Now, this is going to be really hard to see, but I'm going to circle. You might be able to see as a little spot on your screen. There's a little human icon, a little Google account icon right here next to that sticky note. And it happens to be that person right there. Finn Galfridian is the character from Star Wars, and we use that for our training account. And so you can actually see who's working on adding a sticky note at a particular moment in time. So as a teacher, you can kind of dip in to see what's happening in your frames and see what your students are up to. And don't forget, when you work with students for the first time and you're showing them how to use Jamboard, don't forget to click on the 3 dots. You'll see the 3 dots in different locations. You'll see them for frames, and you'll see them for images, and you'll see them for text blocks. But basically, those 3 dots always lead to hidden goodness throughout the Google world. But in this case, it's the More Options button that allows you to duplicate or delete either a frame, in this case, these are frames, or an image. So how do you share a Jamboard? Well, Jamboards appear in your Google Drive. So when you go to the more to the new menu in Google Drive, you go down across to more. I don't have a slide to demonstrate this, but you'll play around with Google Drive later. You'll find it. You'll find Google Jamboard under that more part of that menu. And once you've created your Jamboard, you can share a Jamboard just like you would. So I shared the Jamboard at the very beginning, that activity we did with the scrambled words, using the anyone on the internet with this link can view it. And I just copied that link, may turn that into a bit.ly link, and Temba shared that with you earlier today. In Google Classroom, there are many ways you can share in Google Classroom. You could put that view-only link into a class announcement. You could ask a question and drop that link in, or you can share a Jamboard as an assignment. So this is using the assignment feature in Google Classroom. I simply select at the bottom of that assignment, I've got the Add button, select Google Drive, and if I've been working on something recently, it's going to appear in the recent section. Otherwise, you'll find it in My Drive. And remember that students, you want to think about how you're sharing this. If you want students just to be able to view your Jamboard and you're going to do a live demonstration, you can share one Jamboard that's in your Drive and use that to do your live demo. And students would see that on their own device, and they would see you teaching from that Jamboard, but they wouldn't be able to edit it. Or you can share it so students can edit the file themselves, which means everybody you've shared it with will be able to work in one Jamboard. So you want to use that with caution, because sometimes chaos and mayhem will ensue. Or you can make a copy for each student. And that's the one you would select if you want students to do individual work that they're going to complete on a Jamboard, and then they're going to turn it back into you as an individual Jamboard. Now, when I say individual Jamboard, it could have multiple frames. So it could be a collection of different frames, but it's still one Jamboard that you're assigning for each student. And this is the last cool thing. If you're using Google Meet, you can actually create a Jam from a Google Meet. And I know a lot of people don't like looking at the menu items, but in this case, we've got the that More Options button in Google Meet. It's right down next to the Present Now button at the bottom right hand of your screen in a Google Meet. You can then scroll all the way up at the top. You'll find Open a Jam. So you create a whiteboard directly from your Meet. And that's some of the Jamboard basics. I'm going to quickly talk to you about some of the extras, and then we'll have a couple of minutes for questions and answers. The touch screen, one of the most important things when you start working with students on Jamboard, if they're using an Android, an iOS device, or a Chromebook with a touch screen, you'll need to point out this blue Edit button. That blue Edit button appears in the bottom right-hand screen in the Jamboard app. And it's not exactly the most intuitive location. And sometimes when I switch from the Chrome app to my Android app on my Chromebook, I have to remember, oh, I need to click that edit button in order to do something to this Jamboard. But you also have in the touchscreen app an undo and a redo button. And those are really nice, because if you make a mistake, it's so much easier to tap these buttons than to do anything else. You can also use Command or Control Z on your device if you're using a Chrome, the app on Chrome. But there are some other extras using Android or iOS touchscreen devices. You can insert Drive content directly into your Jamboard, which you can't do with the Chrome app. You can take a picture with your Android or iOS device. You can bring in items directly from your image library. And there are even stickers that are available. I haven't given you guys any examples of those because I want to tease you with that one to go try this out on your Android or iOS device. But I am going to show you examples of the assisted drawing tools, because those are really cool. And for me, that was worth playing around with Jamboard on my Chromebook, because I was able to do this. I could draw a circle. These are both of my drawings, I have to admit. And I'm able to draw that circle, and the assistive tools automagically convert those into a nice round circle, or that funny dog. So Google was able to recognize that that horrible shape I drew up here is actually something that should look like that. And I didn't have to be an expert person who drew. And there are lots of different assistive tools. So we've got a text-to-text tool. So if you're sketching away on your Chromebook and you want to just convert that to text, you can do that automagically and save yourself some time. If you want to draw, if you're just sort of sketching away and you want to draw a circle and you want it to be a circle, you've got that tool as well. And then you've got that magical drawing tool where once you draw something, Google's going to make some guesses, and it gives you a little bit of a menu below your drawing and allows you to choose which one it thinks you were trying to draw. And there's always a choice. It's not that it just gives you one choice. It actually gives you many choices as you're drawing for what you're trying to aim for, which is really cool. You can see that cat. That's actually a really good cat, but Google automagically turns it into a fancy cat. And that is it. We are a little bit over time. I want to thank you for your indulgence. If you've joined us, I'm going to go ahead and ask Temba to come on and just tell me if there are any questions. And I know I want to respect your time because you are busy teachers. So I'm going to show you the slide that will get you to those jam plates. But Temba, do we have any questions?
Hi, Kevin. Actually, surprisingly, no questions whatsoever.
No questions. That's okay.
I did have
you want to go ahead and
prompt just to remind everybody to ask questions if they do have, but so far, no questions.
Okay, thanks, Temba. Temba, your connection's a little slow, so and I could hear you, but you don't have to repeat yourself. But we'll go ahead and assume there were no questions because of that part I heard. So Temba's going to drop the link into the YouTube chat for these free templates, which I like to call jam plates. And I want to thank everybody for your time today. I hope you enjoyed the session. And with that, I'm going to just play you out with a little bit of music. And thanks for coming.
Get ready, yeah, we're jamming. Yeah, we're jamming. Ooh, yeah, we're jamming.